you cannot be vertically integrated in New York State with two key exceptions. If you're one of the 10 existing medical cannabis companies, the ROs, 9 of which are multi-state operators not based in New York. One of them is a New York company. Or if you hold a micro business license. And a micro business license is modeled after these farm winery, craft brewery, farm brewery licenses that you see on the alcohol side in New York. And that's basically going to allow you to produce, grow, process, and then offer for retail sale your own products, right? But there's other types of retail licenses. So if you pick the retail side, you have to stay on the retail side. You cannot be on the production side of the industry. But there's 3 retail licenses. On-premise consumption is one that I'm most excited about. I think it really fits in with the strengths of New York, especially down in New York City, and the fact that our cannabis culture is so much socially driven, right? So on-premise consumption, think of a bar or a restaurant. Retail dispensary where you're selling to someone so they can take home, think of a liquor store. And then also at-home delivery. Now, if you want to do delivery, you could either have your own retail location and then also offer delivery, or you can be a delivery-only company, but you can only have up to 25 full-time employees. So there is, sort of a level playing field there, or at least that's the intention from lawmakers. You can go on the production side. I saw a question, what's the difference between a nursery and cultivation? Cultivation, you're growing for flower, you're growing for a finished product that's going to be then either processed and put in a value-add product, or sold directly to the consumer, sold into a dispensary. A nursery is really growing plants in the vegetative phase for clones or for seed for either home growers or other cultivators to grow. It's a 3-tier system. So unless it's your own product, you have to go through a distributor. So distributor tier is in there, just like alcohol, and it's required unless you are part of the carve-out for self-distribution. Location. So this is a kind of an interesting part of preparing for a licensure, because a lot of what people are saying is you need to lock down a location, you need to buy, you need to lease a location right away. You might be sitting on that for a year at this point, where you don't really know when the applications will be available. But that's not quite the case. You need to have a location when you go to apply for a license. And when having a location just means that you can demonstrate that you will control the property. You can take control of the property within 30 days of being awarded that license. So this kind of lowers the barrier to entry in that you don't need to own outright property right away, and kind of tips the balance back to some of these smaller entrepreneurs. Municipal opinion. So in New York City, it's going to be your community board. Your community board is going to either give you a thumbs up or thumbs down on whether they want you to be located there, as a business, and whether that's, in the production side or the retail side of the business. That municipal opinion will be taken into consideration by the licensing board, which is Cannabis Control Board, but it's only taken in consideration. It's not, if you get a no, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't operate. Capital. So this is very important, because capital is one of the largest barriers to entry for any small business getting into the cannabis space, because there is a lot of restrictions on traditional financing and traditional paths of receiving capital. You cannot go to a bank and get a line of credit or a loan for an adult use cannabis business because it's federally illegal, right? So a lot of what ends up happening is non-traditional capital markets, private equity comes in, and they usually end up taking predatory positions in businesses, especially social equity companies. So it's very important to go as far as you can without raising capital, and then look to the state. The state's authorized to issue grants and loans to social equity applicants. That's priority applicants, which is a larger category than just social equity. It also includes distressed farmers, service-disabled veterans, women-owned businesses, along with minority-owned businesses. Economic equity applicant is also in there too. So that's really what you're going to have to know. And what we tell all of our clients is that the most important aspect of, right now that you should be doing in planning for a cannabis business is understand your core competencies, understand what niche you'd like to fill in the industry, and begin customer discovery, understand what customer base you want to serve, and go towards that, right? New York is setting a program that cannot really be completely consolidated by some of these, large multi-state operators as we've seen in other states. So there's going to be opportunities. It's important, and there's going to be ability to compete. It's important that you are not looking to do everything, that you're looking really to operate in a space that you can excel at and execute your business plan. Beyond that, I did have another question in the chat around Delta 8 THC. How New York is going to handle Delta 8 THC. So right now, under the cannabinoid hemp program, there is proposed rulemaking that has not been finalized yet that would ban the sale of Delta 8 THC. The NYCGPA submitted comments to the state, and we oppose the ban on Delta 8 THC, but unfortunately, it looks like that's inevitable. It hasn't been finalized yet, so this could be a matter of weeks, could be a matter of months before we actually see that happen. So that's all I really have. Lorraine, I guess now to get into Q&A.
Thanks so much, Keelan. I'm seeing that some folks weren't able to see. I'm hoping that everything is fine now. If anyone's having any issues, just let me know in the chat. I think it should be fine. We had you on Spotlight, and you were pinned as well. So, all right. So I'll just kind of get right into it. There's a question, or there are several questions around licensing, and I believe that Sydney answered one of them, which was how many licenses can one person own? Where can you go to apply to get a license? I don't know if you want to just cover that. Either one of you want to cover that one?
Sure. I mean, the licensing isn't available yet. Applications aren't available yet. There's not even an Office of Cannabis Management really established, right? So we're still looking at a number of months, if not through the end of the year, in order for that to be rolled out. Then you have regulations that come out, and then you'll be applying directly to the OCM. The executive director of the OCM will make your initial decision on whether you get approved or not. The Cannabis Control Board will either object to it or allow that decision by the executive director.
Great, thanks. And there were some questions around social equity, and that hasn't worked in the past for programs that say that they want to focus on that. But if you want to talk a little bit about the taxation portion and the allocation of the taxes towards the different programs, education, social justice initiatives, etc., so that folks can understand what will happen when that turns around next year.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer it unless you'd like to, Sydney.
Yeah, and also just stress, the fact that taxes won't happen until retail starts, right? So you can kind of talk about regulation and how that's in process, et cetera, and how taxes will come into play.
Yes, so, the state will take some of their tax revenue, and some of it will go into a community reinvestment fund, but they also will be able to realize revenue through a one-time licensing fee to the existing medical registered organizations. That money should be allocated towards social equity programs that are outlined in the bill, but are decently non-committal, right? So they are able to issue loans and grants, but are not required to for social equity applicants. There's priority licensing, as you mentioned earlier. So, there's a goal that 50% of licenses will go towards these priority applicants, but it's a goal. It's not a requirement necessarily. And then also the state can fund incubator programs, which is kind of broad, but I think you'll see some innovation there in terms of what those incubator programs will be in reducing some of the barriers to entry. One of the largest barriers to entry, as I mentioned before, is access to knowledge and expertise in the space. And so hopefully these, incubator programs can kind of start to fill that gap.
Great. And thank you for that. There's a question, I don't know if you want to answer this, Sydney, around, or Kaylin, around, most people are interested in this, can I convert my cafe into recreational use, or, can a retailer buy inventory from other state, right? For instance, as a distributor from Washington State to a retailer in New York. So how does that, can you want to talk a little bit about use, sales, and distribution?
Yeah, I think and Caitlin can come in here too. I think we're not going to know if you can convert your shop into a cannabis shop yet, because we haven't had seen the regulations yet, and they're going to talk about zoning, and the regulators are going to figure out where cannabis can be zoned. So, and that actually might be left up to your local municipality, who actually makes that final decision. As far as, can you buy cannabis products from another state and bring it into New York? No, because that would violate interstate commerce laws, especially for a product that is federally still illegal.
Yeah, and so you also cannot have any premise serving alcohol that also serving adult use cannabis. So when we talk about, can you convert a cafe over, well, you could, but it has to now be a dedicated cannabis dispensing location, right? So whether it's on-premise consumption or retail, right? So, you can't operate other businesses within that business, if that makes sense, within that location, within the boundaries that you're going to, mark off in your application. Similar to a liquor license.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think there are also a lot of questions that surrounding financing and, in general, things that have to do with regulation. So I don't know if you mentioned the Cannabis Control Board. Maybe we can talk a little bit about timeline and how the federal government hasn't really legalized cannabis, so there's no federal funding. I don't know if you want to kind of weave those kind of the two things together to be clear to folks that regulation isn't here yet, and federal policy isn't here yet, and how maybe talk about some advocacy.
Yes. So because it's illegal federally and will continue to be illegal federally for a long time and foreseeable future at this point, you have a couple considerations. One of them is your tax burden, right? So 280E basically allows you to only take a deduction for your cost of goods sold. But if you're a retail dispensary, you're really able to make much of a deduction. So you end up paying a very high effective tax rate. So that's something to keep in mind, right? I think a lot of people think, you sell, if I can sell pot, I'm going to make a ton of money, right? Well, not always. There's a lot of other considerations around that, and there's a lot of businesses that are not profitable in states that are more established, like California, like Colorado. So that's very important, like I said, that you really nail down your core competencies and who your customer is and what your business is going to be, right? In terms of taking traditional financing, most institutional banks will not loan to cannabis companies because it is federally illegal. There's issues with KYC, know your customer, and some other issues there. There is some credit unions that will bank cannabis, but we don't know if any in New York will be set up to do so, or make the decision to do so.
Thank you for that, Kaylin. And then again, just on the business side of things, again, maybe this was good for you. Let's see. Any more info on microbusiness cultivation size limitations? And then there's another question on, can you have farm located anywhere in New York State, or is that subject to local approval?
Yeah, well, so in terms of your first question on size of canopy size for micro business, the NYCGPA has just put out a position paper on that, where we're recommending a 5,000 square foot canopy space for micro businesses, with the largest share of licenses being awarded to those micro businesses, and the amount of licenses narrowing as you get to larger canopy sizes. But that is going to be done in regulation. I do feel decently confident that's going to be in the ballpark of that 5,000 square feet, give or take maybe 50%, either way. Which is a pretty decent sized operation. Now, the thing is with a micro business license, you can only sell your own products, right? So the statute does not allow you to just operate as any other, retail dispensary. It's really for a vertically integrated small craft production business.
Okay, thank you for that. And let's see.
There was a question, Lorraine, about where can someone apply for a retail license and what are the costs. I wanted to talk about that because, again, the regulations have not come out yet. So you cannot have an application that have come out without an Office of Cannabis Management or all those nominations that I mentioned before. So there is no place right now that you can apply for a retail license. We hope that we'll see RFPs for the retail license come out next year. And then, then the regulators will be outlining the costs, but at this moment, we don't know what those are.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's a lot of misinformation that goes around. I hear this like more so than anything else to say it's going to cost me $200,000 to get a license, right? Now, that was the cost on the medical program. That was a totally different program. I don't expect the fees to be anywhere near that, especially for small businesses. And if they are, then the Cannabis Control Board completely misunderstood the intent of the law. So I do believe that'll be closer to like liquor licensing fees, which we're talking about in the thousands, maybe $10,000. We'll see, but it's not going to be that prohibitive, in terms of fees.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. This is an interesting question around the timeline for approving licenses. Will they be approving all licenses at the same time, or will the nursery and cultivating licenses be approved first, followed by dispensary deliveries? Again, that's in the regulation and you don't know yet, right?
Yeah, it's unknown. It's reading the tea leaves, right? And there's a lot of people who will charge a lot of money to read those same tea leaves, but it's just best guesses here. I think that they will. The state is definitely. I do know the state is anxious about not having enough supply. At the beginning of the marketplace, so they definitely will look to licensed producers, with some sort of haste. But they also don't want to give too much, unfair advantage to some of these large companies that already exist. Like I said, there's 10, 9 of them aren't based in New York. They're MSOs, meaning they're operating in multiple states, and doesn't necessarily mean they're bad, but it means that they're taking a share of opportunity away from New Yorkers and, the people that we really would like to have this opportunity. So the state's gonna be very careful in who gets, licensing first. I think that most licensing, or maybe at least 50%, is going to go to priority applicants, which is a pretty wide, but I think the state will look to be very intentional about making sure that the beginning is this industry is equitable and diverse.
Thank you. So lots of questions around licensing, and that you already answered the question. Let's see. There was another question that I thought was interesting here. I'm a certified herbalist with and would like to have a special license for cannabis in my practice, but that's answered under, you just answered that as well. There is a cultivation question. This is the one here I wanted to ask. On the cultivation side, will most of the canopy be indoors due to the seasonal weather in New York?
It's a great question, and something that's an issue that we've been dealing with. I also co-chair the policy committee at NYCGPA, and it's an issue that we've been dealing with, right? The realities is, and I've worked with a lot of outdoor cannabis cultivators. The reality is that it's very difficult to produce high quality cannabis in New York consistently year to year. Some seasons are a lot better than others, right? And also with later flowering, cannabis, it's very difficult. And you also only get one season a year, one crop a year. So I do think that there is going to be a large place for outdoor cannabis growing, but the majority probably will be some sort of controlled environment. Controlled environment doesn't necessarily mean completely indoors. It could also mean a greenhouse operation. I think that's kind of that medium ground there, where it's a little bit lower cost of production, and it's also a lot more environmentally friendly in terms of energy usage. But this is definitely something interesting. I think that anyone who is growing for outdoor cultivation will also need controlled environment or indoor facilities, and that's just to maybe hold genetics, or develop their propagates. You also think about curing and drying. So there's a lot more to it than just and this is something that I mentioned earlier before the call started. But many farmers in New York State do not have the infrastructure right now to really go in and start growing cannabis. It takes a lot of investment in infrastructure development, and it's always something that anyone should be very careful about as they make their plans to enter this space. Is really what's going to be needed, what the level of investment is, and what sort of risk they're comfortable taking.
Yeah, thank you. I have two other questions before we wrap, and then I just want to let everybody know that we're going to go through the questions that you've asked and make sure that we answer them, and I'll send a recap email and answer all of the questions. But this one is about Senator Cooney, Senator Cooney's bill for farmer starting to plant. Any update on that and Senator Cooney's bill?
I think it's a great bill. I mean, I don't know how realistic that passes by the end of this year. I would not say that it's very much made high hopes at the NYCGPA for that passing, because it requires provisional licensing to be awarded on January 1st, which is a very tight timeline. And I don't know if it's necessarily realistic. We'll see what happens, and then when the legislative session begins again in January, February, March, we'll probably maybe see some movement on Jeremy Cooney's bill. But obviously, Senator Cooney, he's the new senator and really leaned into this issue around cannabis, is very well educated, and is really a champion for the industry and for small entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, people of color, people who really haven't had these opportunities awarded to them in many other sectors. I think is very important that legislation, there's going to need to be more legislation to ensure that these barriers to entry are not do not stay in place as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. And I see that Sydney's answering some questions regarding just equity in terms of the market. I know that that's a concern for smaller marketers, smaller retail outfits. How they would be able to compete with larger markets, larger businesses. I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit. That's always a concern, and how that will play out.
Well, yes, and I want to answer one of the questions. It might just be easier to answer verbally than on typing it out. But to answer your first question, yeah, the way New York State has this law set up is that it's really beneficial to smaller businesses and especially social equity businesses. So if you want to start a business, there are opportunities more so in New York than probably any other market. I think that the competition is probably definitely going to come from those 10 registered organizations who are the largest cannabis businesses in the world that can vertically integrate and can just have a lot more freedom than probably everybody else in the industry. But that does not have to last forever, right? I think there could be opportunities farther down the line as some of these smaller businesses get up and running and they do well and they want to expand. I don't see why New York State would harm those folks and not allow them to continue on and expand their business and do better. And if they're able to, they've already proved that, hey, I have a successful business. I cannot imagine that someone will say, well, you have to stay small. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of building generational wealth for social equity folks who have been harmed by the war on drugs. So that is against the spirit of the bill, and I don't see that happening. There will probably be opportunities in the future to expand upon and compete with some of the bigger players. And then there's a question here that I don't know if I completely understand, but it says, so no minority-owned retail space that have license already to sell like cigarettes, hookah, vapes, can't apply for cannabis retail lounge license, but a restaurant can apply. So no, right now the regulations haven't come out. So if you are selling cigarettes, I don't know if you're going to be able to sell cannabis. Typically in lounges and what they've done in other states, you can only sell cannabis, right? If you sell alcohol, you cannot sell cannabis in that space. I think that that's just like a morality clause that folks have, and I don't think that's changing anytime soon because cannabis is too new to regulators for them to allow different types of businesses in the same or different type of products in the same space. But you can absolutely continue to have your separate business and have a cannabis lounge as well. You're not barred from applying. you can apply and have that business. How, you know, if you have another shop, you just can't do it in the same space. And that's because I don't see regulators on any level of government being comfortable with that for years to come.
Yeah, thanks for answering that question, because that was going to be one that I would have gone back to. And as we, close for time, a lot of the questions are coming. There's one about community gardens. Will they be allowed to grow and sell? That's going into use, which we already know information about how much, ounces, what you can have on you, what you can grow. But obviously the regulation will talk about the details, right? The devil is in the details. So all of that is unknown. And maybe you want to end with just talking about what you know, what you don't know, the timeline. It could be next week, it could be next year. It's just, with the new leadership, you're just not sure what's going to come and when it's going to come, right? So
yeah,
with that.
I know Kaylin is definitely deep into this, but I'll just say quickly that, like I said before, we really believe that the new governor is going to speed things up significantly. What the timeline is that we I can only guess, right? There's rumors that there might be a special session happening soon after Labor Day, where because when Governor Cuomo resigned, there were so many resignations from his staff from all levels of government and all parts of the government, that they have to fill those spots for everyone soon. And we anticipate that while they're filling those spots, the Senate is confirming those folks that the governor will also put cannabis as a priority, and we're hoping for that. Once that happens, we hope things move quickly and that we'll see regulations hopefully by the end of this year, but it is pure speculation. I have nothing to prove that is the case. We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely doesn't happen next week. That's for sure. I think that once the Cannabis Control Board does get created, they got to build, the OCM is going to be more than a 100-person organization, right? And anyone who has to hire understands what a task that's going to be. I think that by the end of this year, be very aggressive. I would love for that to happen. I really do think that this is probably a next year issue, meaning that that's when we're going to see regulations. That's when we're probably going to see applications. We're going to see a lot of the action, right? But I mean, these issues, every issue is going to be deliberated and argued over, because I mean, there's a lot of things that the bill was 120 pages, but believe it or not, it's very broad and leaves a lot to regulation. The regulation is probably going to be 1,000 pages or more. So any of the questions, take any question in the chat right now, right, and you can take that and turn that into a dozen page piece of regulation. And there's multiple sides to that, right? And so that's the process that's going to have to happen. And, really just hope that it doesn't get slowed down like Massachusetts. New York should move quickly and aggressively to get businesses licensed and get licenses in the hands of our entrepreneurs. The most innovative place in the world. We're the, hub of capitalism and culture for the entire world. And you just have to arm these, entrepreneurs with a license and let them go for it and compete. So as Sydney said, the competition is these 10 massive companies, but if you look at their performance, they're not really getting great products in the marketplace. They don't really understand the consumer. And so there's a lot of room there to beat them. And I think you allow New Yorkers to do it, and we will.
Well, thank you so much for this discussion. And for everyone, I will get back to your questions in a recap. I guess what we can take away from this is that, until a Cannabis Control Board has been formed, we won't know the details of the regulation. And in terms of retail, that's not going to happen until the next fiscal year, April at least. So that's one timeline that we know at least, that there won't be any selling happening because that's, leading into the next fiscal year and taxation, etc. So I just want to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much for all the information. It was really informative. And I want to thank our attendees. Thank you so much for asking your great questions. And we will definitely be getting back to you to make sure we've answered some of the questions that we were not able to get back to you with. Please stay engaged in what the Chamber is producing. Please visit our website, www.brooklynchamber.com. We have lots of different programs and resources for small businesses. So we're happy to, connect with you at any time. So we look forward to the next event. Thanks, everyone.